The wind did not just blow across the Callaway Ranch, it scoured it. It was a living thing, a relentless and invisible hand that stripped the paint from the barn and drove grit into the deepest creases of a man's skin. Ethan Callaway stood by the south paddock, his gloved hands gripping the rough cedar post he had just set. He tested it with his shoulder, feeling the solid resistance, but his eyes were not on the fence. They were fixed on the small, iron-fenced plot of land beneath a trio of cottonwood trees a quarter-mile closer to the house. It was late autumn in the year 1884. The Wyoming Territory was turning gray and brown, preparing for a winter that promised to be as unforgiving as the last. Ethan wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He was 35 years old, but the lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark beard made him look 10 years older. Grief did that to a man. It cured him like leather left out in the sun. The house behind him was a sprawling structure of timber and stone, built to hold a large family, to ring with the laughter of children and the bustle of a busy wife. Instead, it held only silence. It had been 5 years since Sarah died. 5 years later, the midwife had walked out of the bedroom with blood on her apron and a shake of her head, taking both the mother and the child in a single, cruel night. Since then, Ethan has worked. He expanded the herd to 2,000 head of cattle. He bought out the struggling homesteaders to the east. He became the wealthiest man in Dead Lantern, and the loneliest. He went home only to sleep, and he woke before dawn to avoid the empty side of the bed. The only other soul who lived in the main house was Suma. She was an Apache woman of indeterminate age, her face a map of deep canyons and weathered stone. She had come with the land when Ethan bought the original deed, or perhaps she simply belonged to the earth itself and allowed Ethan to stay there. She cooked his meals, mended his shirts, and spoke less than 10 words a day. She knew the silence of the house better than he did. She moved through it like smoke. On this particular Tuesday, the wind carried the sound of a distant whistle. The freight train was arriving in town, 10 miles away. Ethan looked at the horizon, feeling a strange pull, a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the labor. He needed supplies. That was the lie he told himself. He needed nails and flour. But the truth was that the silence of the ranch had become deafening, and he needed to hear the noise of living people, even if he did not speak to them. He saddled his bay mare, a sturdy beast named Bess, and rode toward Dead Lantern. The town of Dead Lantern was not much to look at. It was a scar of timber and mud cut into the prairie, consisting of a single main street that churned into a quagmire when it rained and hardened into ruts when it froze. But it was alive. Horses stamped at the hitching rails, and the sound of a piano drifted from the Golden Nugget Saloon. Tinny and out of tune. A freight wagon had just pulled up in front of the Mercantile, the mules hanging their heads in exhaustion. The driver, a craggy man with tobacco stains on his beard, was tossing crates down to the boardwalk. But the few men loitering on the porch of the general store were not looking at the crates. They were looking at the woman who was stepping down from the passenger bench. She was unlike anyone who usually climbed off a freight wagon in this part of the territory. She wore a dress of gray wool, simple and travel-stained, but fitted with a grace that spoke of a city. She was slender, perhaps too thin, and when her boots touched the dusty ground, she swayed slightly, as if the earth itself was unsteady. She turned, and the sunlight caught her face. She was pale, her skin possessing a translucence that seemed ill-suited for the harsh Wyoming wind. Her hair was dark, pulled back severely under a modest bonnet, but wisps of it had escaped to frame a face that was striking not for its vanity, but for its stillness. She looked like a woman holding her breath. Ethan reined Bess in at the livery stable and walked toward the general store, his spurs chinking softly against the wood. He saw the driver toss a single trunk to the ground. It was small, battered leather, not enough for a life, barely enough for a visit. The woman stood by her trunk, looking up and down the street. She did not look like a traveler taking in the sights. She looked like a fox checking the wind for hounds. Ethan paused, watching her. He was a man who judged livestock by their gait and men by their grip. And in this woman, He saw something that made his own chest ache. She looked exhausted, not just in body, but in spirit. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a coin, handing it to the driver. Her hand shook, just a fraction, but Ethan saw it. He walked past her, tipping the brim of his hat. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice rough from disuse. She started, her eyes snapping to him. They were brown, dark and depthless, and for a second, he saw terror in them. Then, a mask slid into place. It was a polite, neutral expression, the kind a woman wore to become invisible. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was soft, carrying a cadence that was not from out west. It sounded like rain on a tin roof, gentle and steady. He wanted to ask her name. He wanted to ask why a woman like her was standing alone in the dirt of Dead Lantern with only one trunk. But Ethan Calloway had forgotten how to speak to women who were not ghosts. He nodded once, awkward and stiff, and went inside the store to buy nails he did not need. Her name, the town learned by Sunday, was Delilah Morse. She had taken a room at Mrs. Gable's boarding house, paying for 2 weeks in advance with coins that looked like they had been scraped together from the bottom of a jar. By Wednesday, she had a job at Henderson's general store, replacing the boy who had run off to pan for gold in the Dakotas. The town of Dead Lantern was small enough that a new face was news, but a beautiful, solitary woman was a headline. The speculation began before she had even unpacked her trunk. Ethan saw her again at the church service that Sunday. He usually sat in the back, slipping out before the benediction was fully over to avoid the pitying looks of the matrons who wanted to feed him or marry him off to their spinster nieces. But today, he stayed. Delilah sat 3 rows ahead of him. She sat with her back straight, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She did not sing the hymns. She stood when others stood and sat when others sat, but she did not make a sound. It was her stillness that captivated him. In a room full of fidgeting children, coughing men, and fans fluttering against the heat of the stove, she was a statue. When the service ended, the congregation spilled out onto the lawn. The Reverend stood by the door, shaking hands. Ethan tried to move toward his horse, but the flow of the crowd pushed him near her. She was standing on the edge of the grass, looking toward the horizon where the mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. "It is big," Ethan said. She turned, startled again. She recognized him from the street, and her shoulders lowered half an inch. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. "The country," Ethan said, gesturing with his hat. "It swallows people up, makes them feel small. Is that a warning, Mr. Calloway?" she asked. She knew his name. Someone must have pointed out the rich, widowed rancher to her. "No, ma'am," Ethan said. "It is a promise. Some folks find comfort in being small." She looked at him then, really looked at him, searching his face for malice, finding none. A flicker of something like relief passed through her eyes. "I think I might like that," she said quietly. "To be small enough that the wind blows right over me." Ethan felt a sudden, fierce urge to stand between her and that wind. It shocked him. He had not felt a protective instinct since the day he buried his wife. "I am Ethan," he said, extending a hand. "Delilah?" She replied. She placed her hand in his. Her skin was rougher than he expected, the palm calloused, but her fingers were cold. Delilah Morse. The weeks turned into a month, and the winter began to show its teeth. Snow dusted the high peaks, and the wind grew a bitter edge. Delilah settled into the routine of the general store. She was efficient, quiet, and unfailingly polite. She learned where the stock was kept. She measured lengths of gingham and calico with a steady hand, and she never shortchanged a customer. But the town of Dead Lantern was not kind to mysteries. The whispers began in the sewing circles and the back rooms of the saloon. "I heard she came from Denver. Mrs. Higgins, the banker's wife," whispered loudly while inspecting a bolt of lace. "No husband, no family. A woman her age does not travel alone unless she has burned her bridges." I heard it was worse than that. One of the saloon girls, a redhead named Pearl, told a cowboy at the bar. A man I know saw her in a dance hall in Abilene. Said she goes by a different name. Said she's a runaway whore looking for a soft place to land. The rumors were vicious, born of boredom and jealousy. Delilah was beautiful in a way that made other women check their reflections, and she was silent in a way that made men curious. That combination was a sin in a small town. Delilah heard the whispers. Ethan saw it in the way she held her head a little higher, the way her jaw set tight when Mrs. Higgins came into the store. She never argued. She never defended herself. She simply absorbed the cruelty like a stone absorbs rain. One afternoon, Ethan sent Suma into town with the buckboard to pick up supplies for the winter pantry. He told himself it was because he was busy with the herd. But in truth, he wanted Suma to see her. He trusted the old Apache woman's instincts more than he trusted his own heart. Suma returned 3 hours later. She unloaded the sacks of flour and sugar in the kitchen, moving with her usual silent efficiency. Ethan sat at the heavy oak table, nursing a cup of coffee, pretending to read a cattleman's journal. "Well?" he asked, without looking up. Suma paused, wiping her hands on her apron. Her black eyes were unreadable. "She gave me the good coffee beans," Suma said. "Not the bottom-of-the-barrel stuff Henderson tries to pawn off on Indians." Ethan waited. "She is like a deer that has been shot but is still running," Suma said. "What does that mean?" Ethan asked, setting his cup down. "It means she is bleeding on the inside," Suma said. "She smiles with her mouth, but her eyes are checking the exits. She has great pain, that one. She is used to hiding it." "Is she wicked?" Ethan asked. The question felt heavy in his mouth. Suma snorted, a rare sound of amusement. "Wicked women are happy. Ethan, they enjoy their sins. This one, she carries fear like a heavy sack of grain on her back. She is not wicked. She is hunted." "Hunted by what?" Suma shrugged, turning back to the stove. "By the past. It is the only thing that runs faster than a horse." Ethan began to go to town every 3 days. He invented reasons: a broken harness buckle, a craving for tinned peaches, a need to hear the news from the telegraph office. He would walk into the store, the bell above the door jingling, and wait for her to look up. When she did, and she saw it was him, her expression would soften. It was the only time he saw her guard drop. They began a courtship that was as slow and hesitant as two wild animals meeting in a clearing. He did not bring her flowers. Flowers died in the frost. He brought her a piece of quartz he found in the creek, polished until it shone like ice. He brought her a book of poetry he found in his library, left over from Sarah's collection. One Tuesday, when the store was empty, he leaned against the counter. "I am riding out to the North Ridge on Sunday," he said. "The view is something. You can see all the way to the Tetons if the air is clear." Delilah stopped arranging the jars of peppermint sticks. She looked at her hands. "I do not have a horse, Mr. Calloway." "I have 2, Ethan said, "and a buggy, if you prefer." She looked up at him. The fear was there, swimming behind the brown of her eyes. But there was also a desperate longing, a hunger for something other than the dusty air of the store and the whispers of the women. "I would like that," she whispered. They went on Sunday. The air was cold enough to miss their breath, but the sun was bright. Ethan drove the buggy, and Delilah sat beside him, wrapped in a buffalo robe he had tucked around her. They did not talk much. Ethan pointed out the hawk circling a thermal, the tracks of an elk herd in the mud, the place where the lightning had split an ancient oak tree. Delilah listened, her eyes drinking in the landscape. "It is so open," she said, her voice tight. "There is nowhere to hide. Why do you need to hide?" "Delilah?" Ethan asked. He kept his eyes on the horses, giving her the privacy of his profile. She stiffened. For a moment, he thought she would ask to be taken back. "We all hide. Ethan," she said finally, "you hide in that big empty house. I hide in the open. It is just a different method." Ethan pulled the buggy to a halt at the top of the ridge. Below them, the valley spread out like a crumpled quilt of gold and gray. The ranch was a speck in the distance, smoke curling from the chimney. "I am tired of hiding," Ethan said. His voice was rough, honest. "I am tired of the quiet." Delilah turned to him. She reached out, her gloved hand hovering for a moment before touching his sleeve. "The quiet is safe," she said. "Noise brings trouble." "Not always," Ethan said. He turned to look at her. The wind had whipped color into her pale cheeks. She looked alive. She looked real, not a ghost, not a memory. "I would like you to come to dinner," he said. "At the ranch. Suma makes a venison stew that is better than anything in town." Delilah hesitated. The caution was warring with the want. "People will talk, Ethan. They already say." "Let them talk," Ethan cut in, his voice hard. "I do not care what Mrs. Higgins says. I do not care what the saloon girls say." "I care what you say." Delilah looked at him, searching for the trap. She had spent her life looking for traps. But in Ethan's face, she saw only a simple, rugged honesty. He was a man who built fences to keep things in, not to keep people out. "I said yes," she whispered. The courtship continued through November. It was proper, it was respectful, and it was the lifeline that pulled Ethan Calloway back from the abyss of his grief. He shaved every morning. He bought a new coat. He smiled, actually smiled. When he saw her, the town watched with bated breath, the wealthy widower and the shop girl with the mysterious past. It was a scandal waiting to break. But Ethan's reputation was ironclad, and no one dared speak the rumors to his face. Suma, however, was not afraid of Ethan. It was late one evening in the kitchen. The stove was cooling, popping and ticking in the silence. Ethan was polishing his boots, humming a tune under his breath. "You are going to ask her," Suma said. It was not a question. Ethan did not stop polishing. "I am. You do not know her," Suma said. "I know enough," Ethan replied. "I know she is kind. I know she works hard. I know she makes the silence less heavy. She is afraid. Ethan, we are all afraid of something." "Suma?" "No." Suma turned, pointing a wooden spoon at him. "This is not fear of a storm or a bad harvest. This is the fear of a rabbit that hears the wolf's breath." She looks over her shoulder 3 times before she crosses the street. When a door slams, she flinches like she has been hit. "She has had a hard life," Ethan said defensively. "She told me she was an orphan, that she had to fend for herself." "And you believe her?" Suma asked, her voice dropping low. "I choose to believe her," Ethan said, standing up. He towered over the small woman, but she did not back down. "I choose to give her a chance. Who else will? Suma, the town. They want to tear her apart. I can give her safety. Safety is not a cage." "Ethan," Suma said softly, "if you marry her, you bring her trouble into your house, and you do not even know what that trouble is named." "Her name is Delilah," Ethan said firmly, "and she will be my wife." Suma looked at him for a long time, her dark eyes sorrowful. She saw the hope in him, fragile and green as new grass. She could not trample it, not yet. "Then you better buy a gun that shoots straight. Ethan Calloway," she said, "because trouble always follows a woman with secrets." That same night, in the small, drafty room above the boarding house, Delilah Morse, or the woman the town knew as Delilah, was kneeling on the floor. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window pane. She had pushed the heavy washstand aside and pried up a loose floorboard near the wall. It was her hiding place, the only secure vault she owned. She reached into the dark space and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a few banknotes, a small gold locket, and a letter. The letter was torn, the paper yellowed and stained with what looked like grease and old coffee. It had been folded and refolded 1,000 times until the creases were nearly worn through. She sat back on her heels, holding the paper near the kerosene lamp. She did not need to read it. She had memorized every jagged scrawl, every hateful loop of the ink. But she read it anyway. A penance, a reminder of why she could never truly rest. Not even in the strong arms of Ethan Calloway. "Found your trail in Kansas. You think changing your name hides you. You belong to me. Clara, the law says so. The church says so. You can run to the edge of the earth, but I will find you. I will drag you back by your hair if I have to. You are mine, Mrs. Clara Dane. Do not forget it." The signature at the bottom was a sharp, violent slash. Silas. She stared at the name. Clara Dane. It sounded like a stranger's name now. Delilah was the woman who sold flour and walked by the river with a kind rancher. Delilah was safe. Clara was a woman with a price on her head and a ring of bruises around her neck. A tear leaked from her eye and splashed onto the paper. She hastily wiped it away, terrified that even her tears might reveal her. She looked at the locket. Inside was a picture of a girl, barely 16, smiling, unaware that the man holding the camera was a monster. She thought of Ethan. She thought of the way his eyes crinkled when he looked at her, the rough warmth of his hand, the promise of the vast, empty ranch where she could be small, where she could be safe. He was a good man. That was the problem. A good man would want to save her, and Silas would kill anyone who tried to save her. "I cannot do this to him," she whispered to the empty room. But the cold wind rattled the glass, and the loneliness of the last 2 years rose up to choke her. She was so tired of running. She was so tired of looking behind her. Ethan was a fortress. He was strong. Maybe, just maybe, he was strong enough. She folded the letter, her fingers trembling, and shoved it back into the oilcloth. She placed it deep into the hole and hammered the board back down with the heel of her boot. She stood up, smoothing her gray dress. She walked to the mirror and looked at her reflection. The pale skin, the dark, haunted eyes. "You are Delilah Morse," she told the reflection. "You are a shop girl. You are going to marry a rancher. Clara Dane is dead." But as she blew out the lamp and plunged the room into darkness, she knew it was a lie. Clara Dane was not dead. She was waiting in the dark, holding her breath, listening for the sound of boots on the stairs. And in the silence of the Wyoming night, she could almost hear them coming. The snow began to fall in early December, not in soft, drifting flakes, but in hard, stinging pellets that rattled against the brim of Ethan Calloway's hat like buckshot. It was a warning. The winter of 1884 was going to be a killer. Ethan stood in the center of Henderson's general store, ignoring the eyes of Mrs. Higgins, who was pretending to inspect a jar of pickled eggs by the counter. He looked only at Delilah. She was measuring out a pound of coffee beans, her hands steady. Though her knuckles were white, the proposal had been simple, spoken in the quiet of the livery stable amidst the smell of hay and leather. She had said yes. It had been a whisper, terrified and hopeful, but it was a yes. Now comes the practicalities of surviving the winter. "You cannot stay at the boarding house," Ethan said, his voice low. "Mrs. Gable shuts down the stove in the hallway after 8 o'clock to save coal. The wind cuts right through those walls." Delilah poured the beans into a paper sack. "I have a heavy quilt. Ethan, I will be fine." "You will freeze," he countered. "And I will not have my intended wife shivering in a rented room while I have 5 empty fireplaces at the ranch." She looked up then, and he saw the hesitation. It was not propriety that held her back, it was fear. The town was exposed. Yes, but it was also public. The ranch was isolated, miles of nothing but snow and silence. If a man came looking for her there would be no witnesses. But then she looked out the window. The stagecoach was pulling in, and a stranger stepped off, a tall man in a duster. Delilah flinched. It was a microscopic movement, a tightening of the jaw, but Ethan saw it. She watched the man until he turned and entered the saloon. He was just a drummer selling patent medicine, but the panic in her eyes remained. The town was dangerous. Every stranger was a potential threat. The ranch was a fortress. "I will come," she said softly. Suma did not smile when the wagon pulled up to the main house. She stood on the porch, her arms crossed over her chest, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl. She watched Ethan help Delilah down from the seat. She watched Delilah clutch her small battered trunk as if it contained crown jewels. "She can take the blue room," Suma said, her voice flat. "It is near the kitchen, warmer." "Thank you." "Suma," Delilah said. She did not try to ingratiate herself. She did not smile or offer false compliments. She simply met the older woman's gaze with a kind of weary respect. Ethan carried the trunk inside. The house felt different immediately. For 5 years, it had been a place where men slept and ate. Now, with the rustle of skirts and the faint scent of lavender water that clung to Delilah's coat, it felt like a home again. Or at least, it was trying to be. Suma watched them go up the stairs. She did not trust this woman. She had seen the way Delilah looked at the horizon, scanning it like a sentry. A woman who watched the road closely was expecting trouble, and trouble usually arrived on a horse with a gun. But Ethan looked younger than he had in years. His shoulders were unbowed. For that, Suma would tolerate the guest. For now, life on the Callaway Ranch was not a romance. It was a battle against the elements. The wind howled around the eaves day and night, a constant, mournful choir. The pipes to the water trough froze every morning and had to be thawed with boiling water and curses. The cattle huddled in the draws, their breath steaming in the gray air, and the men worked until their fingers were numb. Delilah did not sit in the parlor and embroider. On her second day, she came into the kitchen wearing a plain calico work dress and an apron she had seemingly constructed from an old flour sack. Suma was peeling potatoes, a mountain of them for the hungry hands. "Give me the knife," Delilah said. Suma looked at her. "You are a guest, the future mistress." "I am a woman with 2 hands and a need to be useful," Delilah replied. "And you are peeling those too thick. You are wasting the best part." Suma handed over the knife without a word. Delilah worked quickly, the peels spiraling off in a single, paper-thin ribbon. She did not work like a lady who dabbled in domesticity. She worked like a woman who had peeled 10,000 potatoes in kitchens where mistakes earned a backhand. Over the next 2 weeks, she permeated the life of the ranch. She mended the wool socks of the ranch hands, rough men named Buck and Shorty who blushed crimson when she handed them back their darned garments. She learned to carry 2 buckets of water without spilling a drop. She scrubbed the floorboards of the parlor until her knees were red, ignoring Ethan's protests that she should rest. "I need the work. Ethan," she told him one evening when he tried to take the broom from her, "please, it keeps my mind quiet." Ethan watched her, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and confusion. She was not the delicate flower he had met in town. She was iron wrapped in silk. Suma watched her too. She saw things Ethan did not. She saw how Delilah jumped when a piece of firewood popped too loudly. She saw how she never stood with her back to a door. She saw how, when she thought no one was looking, her face collapsed into a mask of utter despair. One afternoon, Suma came into the kitchen to find Delilah staring at the butcher block, a heavy cleaver in her hand. She wasn't using it. She was just gripping the handle, her knuckles white, staring at the sharp edge as if measuring it against a threat only she could see. "The meat will not cut itself," Suma said, letting the screen door slam intentionally. Delilah jumped, nearly dropping the knife. She spun around, breathless. "Oh, Suma, I did not hear you. You were far away," Suma observed. Delilah placed the cleaver down carefully. "I was just thinking about dinner." "You are a bad liar, girl," Suma said, moving to the stove. "But you make good biscuits, so I will not ask where you went just now." Delilah looked at the old woman's back. "Thank you," she whispered. The nights were the hardest, and yet the best. After the supper dishes were cleared and the hands had retreated to the bunkhouse to play cards and argue, Ethan and Delilah would sit in the main room. A massive stone fireplace dominated the wall, consuming logs the size of a man's thigh. They sat in 2 leather armchairs, the firelight dancing on their faces. The intimacy of it was overwhelming. They were not married, yet here they were, sharing the silence of a shared life. Ethan found himself talking more than he had in a decade. He told her about Sarah, haltingly at first, then with more ease. He told her about the day he bought the land, about the time the river flooded, about his dreams of building a schoolhouse for the county. Delilah listened. She was a listener of the highest order. She absorbed his words, her eyes soft and attentive. But when he turned the questions to her, the walls came up. "What about your people?" "Delilah," Ethan asked one night, watching the flames reflect in her dark eyes. You said they died when you were young. Influenza. There was a pause, a beat of silence that lasted too long. A fever, she said. In Ohio. Ohio? Ethan mused. I have never been. Is it beautiful? It is green, she said. Her voice was tight, shutting down the avenue of inquiry. It was a long time ago. Ethan, I barely remember it. You must remember something. He pressed gently. A house? A favorite tree? I remember leaving, she said. She stood up abruptly, smoothing her skirts. The fire is dying down. I should fetch another log. Delilah, Ethan said, reaching out to catch her hand. You do not have to run from me. I am not running, she said, but she pulled her hand away. I am tired. Ethan, the cold drains me. She went to her room, and Ethan was left staring at the fire, wondering why a woman would be afraid of her own childhood. He knew she was hiding something. He told himself it did not matter. Everyone out west was running from the past. As long as she was here, with him, the past could stay buried. The blizzard hit 3 days before Christmas. It came screaming down from the north, a wall of white that erased the world. The temperature plummeted to 20 degrees below zero. The snow piled up against the windows, sealing the house in a tomb of ice. The ranch hands were stuck in the bunkhouse, unable to navigate the 100 yards to the main house without risking death in the whiteout. Suma had gone out to the root cellar before the worst of it hit and had decided to stay in her small cabin near the smokehouse, hunkering down with her own fire. Ethan and Delilah were alone. The isolation was absolute. The wind roared like a freight train, shaking the heavy timbers of the house, but inside, it was warm. They moved through the rooms like the last two people on Earth. By the second night, the air between them had changed. The polite distance of their courtship was stripped away by the proximity. They ate a simple meal of bread and stew by the fire, the only light in the house coming from the hearth. Ethan watched her eat. The firelight turned her skin to gold. She looked up and caught him staring. She did not look away this time. It is loud, she said, nodding toward the window where the wind battered the glass. It will pass, Ethan said. It always does. Does it? She asked. Or does it just wait for the next time? Ethan stood up and moved to her chair. He knelt beside it, bringing his face level with hers. He saw the fear in her eyes, the ancient, hunted look that Suma had warned him about. I will not let the storm get in. Delilah, he said, I built this house to stand. She reached out and touched his face. Her fingers trembled against his beard. You are so sure of everything, Ethan. You are so solid. I am sure of you, he said. She let out a small, choked sound, half sob, half laugh. You shouldn't be. You do not know what I am. I know you are the woman who brought light back into this house, he said. He kissed her. It was not the chaste peck on the cheek he had given her after church. It was a claim, and she did not pull away. Instead, she made a noise in her throat, a sound of desperate need, and tangled her hands in his hair. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent. The weeks of restraint, the months of loneliness, the terror of the storm outside, it all collapsed into a singular moment of hunger. Delilah, he whispered against her mouth. Don't talk, she said fiercely, pulling him closer. Please, Ethan, don't talk. Just make it go away. Make the world go away. They moved from the chair to the rug before the fire. There was no talk of marriage, no talk of propriety. The storm had erased the rules. There was only the heat of the fire and the heat of their bodies. For Delilah, it was not just passion. It was an exorcism. For the first time in years, she was not Clara Dane, the property of a monster. She was a woman choosing this. She was choosing this man, this touch. She clung to him as if he were a raft in the ocean, drowning in the sensation of being wanted, not taken. Ethan held her as if she were made of glass that he was terrified of breaking. But she met him with a ferocity that stunned him. They came together with the desperation of people who knew the morning might bring ruin. Later, as the fire burned down to embers, they lay tangled under the buffalo robe. Ethan was asleep, his breathing deep and even, his arm thrown protectively over her waist. Delilah lay awake. The wind was still howling, but inside the silence was louder. She looked at Ethan's face, relaxed in sleep, looking younger than she had ever seen him. The guilt hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. She had let him love a lie. She had let him take a woman who belonged to a violent past into his heart. If Silas found her here, he would not just hurt her. He would burn this house to the ground. He would kill Ethan just to teach her a lesson. She was poisoned. Suma was right. She was a trap waiting for spring. Slowly, carefully, she slid out from under Ethan's arm. The cold air of the room bit at her skin. She dressed in the dark, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fasten her buttons. She had to leave, now, before the snow stopped, before she ruined him completely. She packed her small bag by the light of the dying embers. She moved like a ghost, the way she had learned to move in the brothels of Denver, in the back alleys of Cheyenne. She crept to the kitchen door. If she could get to the barn, she could take a horse. She would ride until the horse dropped or she froze. It didn't matter. Anywhere was better than here, where her presence was a ticking bomb. She opened the kitchen door, bracing herself for the blast of cold. Instead, she found warmth. Suma was sitting at the kitchen table. A single candle burned in the center. A teapot sat on a trivet, steam curling from the spout. The old woman did not look surprised. She looked like she had been waiting there for 100 years. "Going for a walk?" Suma asked. Her voice was dry, devoid of judgment. Delilah froze, her hand on the latch. The wind rattled the door in her grip. "I have to go," Delilah whispered. "I cannot stay. Because you slept with him?" Suma asked. Delilah flinched. "How did you—" "I am old, not deaf," Suma said. "And I know the sound of a woman trying to outrun her own skin." Delilah slumped against the door frame, the fight draining out of her. "You don't understand. I am dangerous to him. Suma, you were right. I am troubled." Suma gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit down. I have to—" "Sit down, girl." Delilah sat. She placed her bag on the floor, ready to bolt, but her legs felt like lead. Suma poured a cup of tea. It smelled of sage and bitter herbs. She pushed it across the table. "Drink. It settles the stomach and the nerves." Delilah wrapped her hands around the cup, the heat seeping into her frozen fingers. "Why are you stopping me? You don't like me. You want me gone." Suma looked at her over the rim of her own cup. Her eyes were black obsidian, reflecting the candlelight. "I want him to be happy," Suma said. "He has been a dead man walking for 5 years. Tonight, for the first time, he is alive. If you leave now, in the middle of the night, without a word, you will kill him again. And this time, he will not come back. He deserves better," Delilah said, tears finally spilling over. "He deserves the truth." "Then give him the truth," Suma said sharply. "Do not give him a mystery. Men can fight the truth. They cannot fight ghosts." "I can't," Delilah whispered. "The truth will destroy this." "Then you drink your tea," Suma said. "You go back upstairs. You lie down beside him, and you wait for the storm to break. Running into a blizzard is a coward's way to die. If you are going to leave him, you look him in the eye when you do it." Delilah drank the tea. It was bitter, but it warmed the hollow place in her chest. She did not leave. She went back upstairs, her feet heavy, and crawled back under the robe. Ethan shifted in his sleep, pulling her close, murmuring her name. Delilah closed her eyes and prayed to a god she hadn't spoken to in years that the snow would never stop. The thaw came 3 days later. The sun broke through, blindingly bright on the white drifts. The world began to move again. Ethan was busy with the hands, checking the herd for losses. He was vibrant, energetic, touching Delilah's shoulder every time he passed her, smiling with a secret joy. Delilah tried to match his smile, but she felt brittle, as if she might shatter. Suma took the opportunity of the thaw to do a deep cleaning of the house. She stripped the linens, swept the ashes, and aired out the rooms. She entered the guest room, Delilah's room, to change the sheets. The room was tidy, excessively so, as if the occupant was trying to leave no trace. Suma stripped the bed, tossing the sheets into a basket. She moved to sweep under the bed frame. Her broom hit something, a loose board. It was not a secret compartment, merely a warp in the wood where the floorboard had pulled away from the joist, but wedged into the crack, hidden beneath the rug, was an oilcloth packet. Suma knew she should not touch it. It was not her way to pry. But the image of Delilah standing at the kitchen door, ready to run into a blizzard, haunted her. She needed to know the name of the danger that lived in this house. She picked up the packet. She unwrapped it. The letter fell out. Suma could read. The missionaries had taught her that much, along with how to pray to a white Jesus. She sat on the edge of the mattress and read the torn, stained paper. Mrs. Clara Dane, railroad foreman. You belong to me. Suma read the words, and the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with the sound of a trap snapping shut. The fear, the way she watched the road, the way she knew how to peel a potato like a servant and mend a shirt like a wife. She was a runaway wife, but not just a wife. Suma knew the name Silas Dane. He was not just a foreman. He was a man who supplied women to the camps along the Union Pacific. He was a flesh peddler, a monster who broke women like horses. And this girl, this Clara, had escaped him. Suma folded the letter. Her hands were not shaking. They were steady with a cold, hard anger. She looked at the door. She did not hate Delilah anymore. She understood her. And for an Apache woman who had seen her own people hunted and broken, understanding was a powerful thing. She tucked the letter into her apron pocket. She would not tell Ethan yet. Ethan was a man of honor. He would react with noise and guns. This required silence. Down in the town of Dead Lantern, the thaw had brought travelers. The roads were passable again. At the Golden Nugget Saloon, the door swung open. A man walked in. He was not a drummer this time. He wore a long coat trimmed with wolf fur, and a gun belt that was worn low and tied to his thigh. He walked with the swagger of a man who was used to people moving out of his way. He ordered a whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was not a wanted poster, not officially. It was a sketch, a drawing of a woman with dark hair and sad eyes. He slid it across the bar to the barkeep. I am looking for a woman, the man said. His voice was like gravel grinding together. Goes by the name of Clara. Maybe Delilah. Maybe Jane. She is a pretty little thing. I like to run. The barkeep squinted at the drawing. He wiped the bar with a rag. Don't know her. The barkeep lied. He knew everyone, but he didn't like the look of this man. The man smiled. It was not a nice smile. I heard she might be in these parts. I heard she might have found herself a rich friend. He put a gold coin on the counter. It spun, gleaming in the lamplight. I'll be in town for a few days, the man said. If you remember anything, come find me. The bounty hunter turned and walked out. The wind blew in through the open door, carrying the scent of snow and violence toward the ranch where Clara Dane was trying to pretend she was safe. The wedding date was set for the second week of January, a time when the Wyoming winter usually took a brief, deceptive breath before plunging into the deep freeze of February. Ethan Calloway drove the buckboard into Dead Lantern with a grim determination, the wheels crunching over the hard-packed ruts of the main street. He was a man on a mission, intent on purchasing the final necessities for a ceremony that he intended to be small, dignified, and unassailable. He needed a new suit coat, and he had ordered a bolt of white silk from Cheyenne for Delilah. It was an extravagance, a folly, perhaps, for a ranch wedding, but he wanted her to feel like a queen, not a refugee. However, as he tied his team to the hitching rail outside the Mercantile, the air in town felt different. It was not just the biting cold. It was the silence. Men on the boardwalk stopped talking as he approached. They tipped their hats, but the gestures were stiff, their eyes sliding away from him. Ethan walked into the bank to withdraw the funds for the silk. The teller, a young man named Timothy, who usually asked after the herd, counted out the gold eagles in silence, his hands nervous. It was on his way out, stepping into the blinding glare of the snow-reflected sun, that Mrs. Higgins intercepted him. The banker's wife was wrapped in furs that cost more than most men in the territory earned in a year. She stood squarely in his path, her face pinched with a self-righteousness that chilled Ethan more than the wind. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice clipped. "Mrs. Higgins," Ethan replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I am in a hurry, ma'am, I am sure you are," she said. "Rushing headlong into disaster often requires speed." Ethan stopped. He looked down at her, his expression hardening into granite. "I would ask you to speak plain, ma'am, or step aside." She bristled, clutching her muff tighter. "We have tried to be kind. Ethan, we have tried to look the other way because of your grief. But there are limits to Christian charity. A man came through here 2 days ago, a bounty hunter." Ethan felt a cold stone drop into his stomach, but his face remained impassive. "We get all sorts on the road to Cheyenne. He had a picture." "Mrs." Higgins hissed, stepping closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried more venom than a shout. "A sketch. It looked exactly like your Delilah. He was asking about a woman named Clara, said she was wanted for crimes in Colorado, said she was a liar and a thief." Ethan stared at her. The street seemed to narrow, the buildings leaning in. He wanted to shout her down, to defend the woman who had slept in his arms during the blizzard, the woman who mended socks and peeled potatoes and looked at him with eyes full of terrified hope. But the doubt was there. It was a small, dark seed that had been planted the moment Suma warned him. And now, Mrs. Higgins was watering it. "You listen to me," Ethan said, his voice low and dangerous. "Delilah Morse is a good woman. She is my intended wife. If I hear that you are spreading gossip from some saddle tramp looking to make a quick dollar, I will pull every dime I have out of your husband's bank by sunset. Do you understand me, Mrs.?" Higgins paled, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. She stepped back, shocked by the ferocity of his tone. "I am only warning you," she stammered. "You are a fool. Ethan Calloway? She has played you for one." Ethan walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers hard enough to make her stumble. He marched to the mercantile, bought the silk without saying a word to the clerk, and drove out of town with the horses at a gallop. He did not look back, but the seed was growing. Roots of suspicion were twisting around his heart, choking the joy he had felt only hours before. At the ranch, the house was warm, smelling of baking bread and wood smoke. Delilah was in the parlor, sewing by the light of the window. She looked up when Ethan entered, her face lighting up with a smile that usually made his knees weak. "Ethan?" she asked, sensing his mood immediately. He stood in the doorway, holding the bolt of white silk. It felt heavy in his hands. He looked at her, really looked at her. Was she Delilah? Or was she Clara? Was the fear he saw in her eyes the fear of a hurt animal? Or the fear of a criminal waiting to be caught? "I am fine," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. The town was crowded. He dropped the silk on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. "For your dress," he said. Delilah reached out and touched the fabric. It was cool and smooth, a luxury she had never dreamed of possessing. She looked at his back as he turned to leave the room. "Ethan? I have work in the barn," he said, not turning around. He walked out, leaving her standing there with her hand on the white silk, the smile dying on her lips. In the kitchen, Suma was watching. She had seen Ethan's face. She had seen the way he looked at Delilah, not with love, but with a measuring, suspicious eye. The poison from the town had reached him. Suma wiped her hands on her apron. She reached into her pocket and felt the crinkle of the paper. It was time. She waited until Delilah came into the kitchen to fetch water for tea. Delilah looked pale, her movements jittery. "He knows something," Delilah whispered. He was cold. "Suma, he has never been cold to me." Suma turned from the stove. She pulled the oilcloth packet from her pocket and laid it on the wooden table. Delilah froze. The color drained from her face so completely that Suma thought she might faint. She stared at the packet as if it were a rattlesnake coiled to strike. "You found it," Delilah breathed. "I found it," Suma said. Delilah looked at the door, then back at the table. Her hands started to shake. Did you show him? Not yet, Suma said. Delilah let out a sob and sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. It's over. He will throw me out. He will send me back. Suma sat down opposite her. She did not offer comfort. Not yet. She needed the truth first. Who is Clara Dane? Suma asked. Delilah lowered her hands. Her eyes were red-rimmed, terrified. But there was a resignation in them, too. She had been running for 2 years. Perhaps part of her was relieved to stop. I am Clara Dane, she whispered. And Silas? My husband. She said. The word tasted like ash. Tell me, Suma commanded. Delilah took a breath. It was a shaky, ragged thing. I was 16. He was older. He came to our town in Ohio. He was handsome. Suma. He wore fine suits and told me I was beautiful. He said he was a foreman for the railroad, that we would travel the west, see the mountains. My parents were dead. I had an aunt who didn't want me. I thought he was a prince. She looked at her hands, twisting her ringless fingers. He took me to the camps. In Nebraska. Then Colorado. He wasn't a foreman. He ran the tents. The women, he traded things. Whiskey, cards, girls. Suma's face remained impassive, but her eyes darkened. She knew these men. She knew the evil that lived in the chaotic sprawl of the railroad camps. He made me work, Delilah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. Not at first. At first, I was just the pretty wife on his arm, but then he lost money gambling. He told me I had to help pay the debt. He said it was my duty. When I refused, he taught me what happens when you say no to Silas Dane. She touched her collarbone, an unconscious gesture to an old break. I was his property. For 4 years, I saw things. I did things, just to stay alive. 2 years ago, in a camp near Denver, there was a fire. A lantern kicked over in a fight. The tent went up. In the confusion, I ran. I just ran. I stole clothes from a clothesline. I cut my hair. I walked until my feet bled. I changed my name to Delilah because it was the only name I could think of from the Bible. And I figured God owed me a new start. She looked up at Suma, tears streaming down her cheeks. I am not a whore. Suma, I was a wife. But to him, there was no difference. Suma looked at the young woman. She saw the scars now, not just the visible ones, but the deep, jagged tears in her spirit. She saw the strength it took to walk out of hell and try to build a heaven in Wyoming. I do not judge you, Suma said softly. The Apache knows what it is to be hunted. We know what it is to lose your name. Delilah reached out and gripped Suma's hand. Please don't tell him. He sees me as clean. He sees me as good. If he knows I was passed around a railroad camp, he will look at me like I am dirt. Suma pulled her hand away gently but firmly. He is looking at you with doubt now. Suma said, that is worse than dirt. Doubt kills love faster than truth. He will hate me, Delilah cried. He might, Suma admitted. He is a man. Men have pride, and their pride is easily bruised. But Ethan Calloway is not a cruel man. He is just hurt. If you let him hear this from a stranger, or a sheriff, or that woman in town with the snake tongue, he will never forgive you. You must tell him. No, Delilah whispered. Yes, Suma said. Tonight, or tomorrow. But soon, before the snow comes again. I can't. You must, Suma said. You want to be his wife? Then you cannot be a liar. A marriage built on a lie is like a house built on sand. The first wind will knock it down. Suma stood up and pushed the letter toward Delilah. It is your story. Suma said, you tell it. I will keep the wolves away from the door, but you must open the door to him. The next morning it dawned gray and bitter. The thermometer on the porch read 10 degrees below zero. Ethan was in the barn, alone. He had sent his hands out to chop ice from the creek. He was working on a wagon wheel, hammering a new rim into place. The physical exertion felt good. It stopped him from thinking. It stopped him from hearing Mrs. Higgins's voice in his head. A liar. A thief. Wanted. The barn door creaked open. A gust of wind swirled the straw on the floor. Ethan did not look up. "Close the door," he barked. Delilah closed it. She stood in the dim light, wrapped in her heavy shawl. She looked small against the vastness of the barn, surrounded by the smell of leather, manure, and sweet hay. "Ethan," she said. He stopped hammering. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. He turned to face her. His face was closed, his eyes hard. "What is it?" he asked. "I need to tell you something," she said. Her voice was trembling, but she forced it to be steady. "Is it about the wedding?" he asked. "Because if you want to change the flowers, Suma can handle it. It is not about the flowers," she said. "It is about me." Ethan threw the rag onto the workbench. He crossed his arms. He looked like a judge waiting for a verdict he already knew. "Go on," he said. Delilah reached into her dress and pulled out the letter. She walked forward, her legs feeling like water, and held it out to him. "My name is not Delilah Morse," she said. Ethan stared at the paper. He did not take it. "I know," he said. She blinked, startled. "You know? I know there is a bounty hunter asking for a Clara," he said. "Mrs. Higgins made sure I knew." Delilah flinched as if he had slapped her. "So, you know. I know what they say," Ethan said, his voice rising. "I know they say you are a criminal. I know they say you are a liar. I wanted to hear you say it. I wanted to believe they were wrong. They are right about the name," she said, tears beginning to spill. "I am Clara Dane." "And the rest?" Ethan demanded. "Are you a thief? Did you steal from a husband who is looking for you?" "I stole myself," she cried. The sudden shout echoed in the rafters, startling the horses. "I stole myself back." She thrust the letter at him. "Read it! Read what he is!" Ethan snatched the letter. He unfolded it violently. He scanned the lines, the threats, the possession. "You belong to me." He looked up at her. His face was not filled with pity. It was filled with a confusing, blinding fury. He felt stupid. He felt gullible. He had opened his home, his heart, his bed to a woman who had been playing a part. "You lied to me," he said, "every day, every time you looked at me. I had to," she pleaded. "If I told you, you would be in danger. Silas is a dangerous man. Ethan, I am not a child," he roared. "I do not need you to protect me. I needed you to trust me. I was scared. And what else?" Ethan stepped closer, looming over her. "What else are you hiding? Clara, was any of it real? The night in the storm? Was that real? Or was that just you securing a hiding place?" Delilah gasped. That was cruel. That was the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to her, because it took the one pure thing she had and twisted it. It was real. She sobbed. "I love you. You love safety." Ethan spat. "You love that I have a warm house and money in the bank. You needed a hole to hide in, and I was the fool who dug it for you." "No!" she screamed. "That is not true. I worked for you. I cared for you. You played a role." Ethan turned away, pacing the length of the stall. "You are a very good actress. Lady, you had the whole town fooled. You had me fooled." He turned back to her, his eyes blazing with betrayal. "I thought we were building something," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought we were starting a life, but you were just waiting for the law to catch up. I am not a criminal. Ethan, I was a victim, and now you are making me one," he said coldly. He looked at her, and for a moment, Delilah thought he might hit her. The rage in him was palpable, but he was not Silas. He clenched his fists at his sides, his knuckles white. "Get out," he said. "Ethan, please. Get out of my barn," he said, "and get out of my house." He turned his back on her and picked up the hammer. He struck the iron rim of the wheel. Clang, clang, clang. The sound was deafening, a wall of noise to drown out her sobbing. Delilah stood there for a moment, watching his back, watching the muscles bunch in his shoulders as he swung the hammer. She realized then that Suma was wrong. The truth did not set you free. It just burned everything down. She turned and ran out of the barn, into the snow. She was packing her trunk when Suma came into the room. Delilah's hands were throwing clothes haphazardly. The white silk lay on the bed, untouched, like a corpse. "He wants me gone," Delilah said, not looking up. She was past tears now. She was in the cold, numb place that came after the pain. He is angry, Suma said calmly. He is a wounded bear. He strikes at everything nearby. He hates me. Suma, he thinks I used him. He thinks I slept with him for room and board. Suma walked over and placed her hand on Delilah's wrist, stopping the frantic packing. He does not hate you. He hates that he was blind. He hates that he could not save you before you needed saving. He told me to leave. And you are going to listen? Suma asked. Since when do you do exactly what a man tells you? Delilah laughed. A brittle, jagged sound. That is funny. Suma, stay, Suma said. I can't. Stay one night, Suma insisted. The sun is setting. It'll be 20 below zero tonight. If you walk to town now, they will find you frozen in a drift by morning. Then Silas wins. Delilah looked at the window. The light was fading, turning the snow to a bruised purple. I cannot stay in the same house with him. He will not come to the house, Suma predicted. He will stay in the barn or the bunkhouse. He is licking his wounds. You stay in this room. You wait. Wait for what? Wait for the silence to speak, Suma said. Delilah sank onto the bed. She was exhausted. Her bones ached. She nodded slowly. One night, she whispered, and then I go. Ethan did not come to supper. Suma took a plate of stew and biscuits out to the tack room in the barn, where a small wood stove fought a losing battle against the chill. She found Ethan sitting on a crate, a bottle of whiskey open on the floor beside him. He was not drunk, but he was working on it. He held the letter in his hand. He had smoothed out the creases. Eat, Suma said, putting the plate on a barrel. I'm not hungry, Ethan rumbled. Eat anyway, she said. You need your strength for being a fool. Ethan looked up at her, his eyes bloodshot. You knew, I knew, Suma admitted. And you didn't tell me. It was not my story to tell. You are supposed to be loyal to me. Suma, I am loyal to your soul. Ethan, Suma said sharply, not your pride. My loyalty was in making sure you heard the truth from her, not from a stranger. She lied to us. She survived. Ethan, there is a difference. You judge her because she did not come to you pure and perfect, like a distinct snowflake. You think because she has scars, she is broken. She was married to a pimp. Suma, Ethan shouted, slamming his hand on his knee. She lived in a brothel. And she walked out, Suma shouted back, her voice echoing in the small room. She walked out of hell. Do you know how strong a woman must be to do that? Sarah died in a warm bed with a doctor holding her hand. This girl walked through fire and came out carrying buckets of water for your horses. Ethan stared at her, stunned by the outburst. Suma never raised her voice. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door. She leaves in the morning, Suma said quietly. She is packing. If you let her go, Ethan Calloway, you are not the man I thought you were. You are just another man who wants a doll, not a woman. She left him alone with the whiskey and the letter. The night was long. The wind picked up again, whistling through the cracks in the barn walls. Ethan sat with the lantern turned low. He picked up the letter again. He read it, not for the facts this time, but for the feeling. You belong to me. He felt the ownership in those words, the sickness of it. He imagined Delilah, Clara, at 16, the age of his niece back east. He imagined her wide-eyed and trusting, being led into a tent filled with smoke and rough men. He imagined the 4 years of horror. He looked at his own hands. They were rough, scarred from work. He had always prided himself on being a hard man, a man who could endure anything, but he had never had to endure what she had. He had lost Sarah, yes, but he had been loved. Sarah had looked at him with adoration until her last breath. Delilah had been looked at with greed, with lust, with contempt, and yet she had stood in his kitchen and made biscuits. She had touched his face with tenderness. She had loved him. You love safety. He had accused her. He took a drink of whiskey. It burned, but not as much as his own shame. He remembered Sarah. He closed his eyes and summoned her face. It was getting harder to see her clearly after 5 years, but he heard her voice. It was the night before she died. She was feverish, holding his hand. "Ethan," she had whispered. "Promise me, anything," he had said. "The world is hard," she said. "It takes things, but don't let it turn you cruel. Promise me you will keep your heart soft. It is the only part of you that matters." Ethan opened his eyes. The lantern flickered. He had broken the promise. Today, in this barn, he had been cruel. He had used her pain as a weapon to defend his own bruised ego. He had acted like the world that had hurt her. He looked at the letter one last time. Mrs. Clara Dane. She wasn't Clara Dane. Clara Dane was a victim. The woman in his house, the woman who fought the blizzard, the woman who stood up to him. That was someone else. That was the woman he loved. He stood up. He corked the whiskey bottle. He blew out the lantern and walked out into the dark, toward the house where a single light still burned in the upstairs window. The cold air stung his face, but for the first time all day, he felt awake. He did not go inside. He was not ready yet. He needed to be sure. He needed to know that if he walked through that door, he was walking in as a husband, not a judge. He stood in the snow, looking up at her silhouette against the curtain. "Don't go," he whispered to the wind. "Just don't go." The sun rose over the Wyoming plains with a deceptive brilliance, casting long, violet shadows across the snow that blinded the eye but offered no warmth. The temperature hovered at 5 degrees below zero, a stillness in the air that felt like the world was holding its breath before a scream. Inside the Callaway Ranch house, the silence was heavier than the drifts outside. Ethan had not slept. He had spent the remaining hours of the night in the tack room, staring at the grain of the wood on the floor. The letter from the man named Silas Dane crumpled in his fist until the paper was soft as cloth. He entered the kitchen just as Suma was pulling a pan of biscuits from the oven. The smell of flour and rising dough, usually a comfort, turned his stomach. Delilah was there. She was dressed in her traveling clothes, the gray wool dress she had arrived in, a heavy coat that had seen better days, and a knitted scarf wrapped tight around her neck. Her small trunk sat by the door, a final, undeniable object of departure. She did not look at him when he entered. She was drinking coffee standing up, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted the cup. Ethan stopped in the doorway. He felt large, clumsy, and achingly regretful. But his pride was a stiff collar that choked the words he needed to say. "You are leaving," he said. It was a statement, flat and dull. Delilah set the cup down. "Yes, the train to Cheyenne does not run until tomorrow," Ethan said. "You will have to wait at the depot. It is cold. I have waited in colder places," she replied, her voice devoid of the softness he had come to crave. Ethan took a step forward. The need to fix this, to patch the hole in the roof before the rain ruined everything, surged in him. But he went about it the way a rancher fixes a fence, with practicalities. "Not hard. You do not have to go," he said. Delilah looked up then. Her eyes were dark, rimmed with red, but dry. "Excuse me, I have been thinking," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "About what you said, about your situation." "My situation," she repeated. "You mean my life. I mean that you have nowhere to go," Ethan said, trying to be reasonable. "If you go back out there, this man, this Silas, he might find you, or the winter will take you. And what are you offering, Ethan?" she asked. "You can stay here," he said. He looked at the floor, unable to meet her gaze. Not as my wife. I cannot marry a woman I do not trust, but I will not turn you out to freeze. You can work. Suma needs help. You can stay in the guest room. I will pay you a wage. You will be safe." He thought he was being generous. He thought he was being kind. Delilah stared at him for a long moment, and then she laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, like a branch snapping in the frost. "A wage," she said. "You want to pay me?" "It is better than the alternative," Ethan said defensively. "Is it?" she asked. She walked toward him, and for the first time, he saw the steel that Suma had spoken of. She did not look like a victim. She looked furious. "You think I ran from a brothel to become a servant in the house of a man who looks at me with pity?" she asked. "Do you think safety is all I want?" "It is what you said you wanted," Ethan argued. You said you wanted to be small, to hide. I wanted a home. Ethan, she cried, her voice cracking. I wanted a place where I was known. I did not want a hiding hole. I wanted a life. She grabbed her gloves from the table and shoved her hands into them. I would rather freeze in a ditch than live in this house and see the disappointment in your eyes every morning, she said. I would rather let Silas Dane find me and drag me back to hell than stay here and watch you look at me like I am something broken that you are too polite to throw away. Delilah, no, she cut him off. Goodbye. Ethan, thank you for the winter. It was a warm dream while it lasted. She picked up her trunk. It was heavy, but she hoisted it with a strength that surprised him. She did not look back. She opened the heavy oak door, and the wind swirled into the kitchen, scattering snow across the floorboards. Then she was gone, the door slamming shut with a finality that shook the pans on the wall. Ethan stood frozen. He felt as if he had been punched in the gut. He had offered her shelter. Why had she looked at him as if he had offered her an insult? He turned to the stove. Suma was standing there, a metal ladle in her hand. She was not cooking. She was gripping the ladle as if she might use it as a weapon. She is proud, Ethan muttered, pouring himself coffee to have something to do with his hands. Foolish and proud. She is not the fool in this room, Suma said. Ethan slammed the cup down, coffee sloshing over the rim. Enough. Suma, I tried. I offered her a place. You offered her crumbs, Suma snapped, turning on him. Her black eyes blazed with a fire he rarely saw. You offered her the scraps from your table because you were too scared to eat the meal. She lied to me. Suma, Ethan shouted. She survived. Suma shouted back. Her voice rang off the rafters. Do you know what that means? Do you have any idea what that girl has lived through? I read the letter, Ethan said, his jaw tight. Reading is not living, Suma said, stepping closer to him. She was a foot shorter than him, but in that moment, she towered over him. She was sold, Ethan, sold like a heifer at auction, used by men who smelled of whiskey and violence, beatings, hunger, shame. For 4 years. Ethan flinched, turning his face away. I do not want to hear the details. You will hear them, Suma hissed. She escaped. She crawled out of that pit. She walked across 3 states with nothing but the clothes on her back and the terror in her throat. She built a life here. She worked. She smiled. She loved you. Suma poked him hard in the chest with a bony finger. Most men would have put a bullet in their own brain if they had lived 1 week of her life. Suma said, but she is still standing. That does not make her a suspect. Ethan Calloway? That makes her a hero. She is stronger than you. She is stronger than any cowboy on this ranch. And you just let her walk into the snow because your pride is hurt that she did not tell you her tragic story on the first date. Ethan stared at the old woman. The words hit him like stones. Stronger than you. She wants love. Ethan, Suma said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. No pity, not charity. If you cannot give her that, then let her go. But do not tell yourself you were kind. You were a coward. Suma turned back to the stove, dismissing him. Ethan stood there, the silence of the house pressing in on him. He looked at the door. He thought of Delilah, Clara, walking alone. He thought of the bounty hunter. He thought of the way she had looked at him in the barn, pleading. Not for safety, but for understanding. He remembered Sarah's voice again. Don't let the world turn you cruel. He had been cruel. He had judged her for the mud on her boots without asking how deep the swamp was that she had crossed. He cursed, a loud, sharp word that made Suma pause. He ran out the back door, not bothering with his coat. Grabbing his hat from the peg, he sprinted to the barn, his boots slipping on the ice. Bess! He roared. The mare whinnied. Startled by his frantic energy, he threw the saddle on her back, his fingers fumbling with the cinch. He did not wait to warm the bit. He shoved it into her mouth, swung into the saddle, and kicked the barn doors open. He galloped out into the white blinding expanse, his eyes scanning the ground. The wind was picking up, erasing the world, but there, faint and nearly filled in, were footprints, small, determined steps leading east, toward the town, toward the train, toward a future that would surely kill her. Delilah could not feel her feet. She had been walking for an hour, or perhaps a lifetime. The cold was not a temperature anymore. It was a physical weight, pressing down on her shoulders, squeezing the air from her lungs. The trunk was gone. She had dragged it for the first mile, then left it by a fence post. It contained clothes she did not own and memories she did not want. All she had now was the coat, the scarf, and the burning coal of anger in her chest that kept her moving. She walked with her head down, squinting against the glare. The tears on her cheeks had frozen into ice, stinging her skin. She was Clara Dane again. The thought made her sick. Delilah Morse had been a good woman. Delilah Morse had a future. Clara was just a fugitive. But Suma was right. She had survived before. She would survive again. She would go to Chicago, or maybe east, to New York, somewhere crowded, somewhere she could disappear truly. Her foot caught on a buried root, and she stumbled, falling hard onto her knees. The snow bit through her skirts. She tried to stand, but her legs refused. The cold had seeped into her muscles, turning them to lead. "Just rest," a voice whispered in her head. "Just close your eyes for a minute. It is so quiet here." She sank back onto her heels. The landscape was beautiful, she thought distantly, white and endless, a clean slate. She heard a sound, a rhythmic thumping. It sounded like a heartbeat. She turned her head sluggishly. A dark shape was cresting the ridge behind her. A horse, a rider. Silas? Panic flared, hot and sharp, piercing the lethargy. If it was Silas, she would not let him take her. She looked at the frozen creek bed to her right. There was open water further down. She would jump. She would let the ice take her before she let him touch her again. She forced herself up, stumbling toward the tree line of the creek. "Clara!" The voice was carried by the wind. It was not Silas. Silas had a voice like oil. This voice was rough, like bark. She stopped, swaying. She turned. The horse skidded to a halt 10 yards away, kicking up a spray of snow. The rider vaulted off before the beast had fully stopped. He was running toward her, stumbling in the deep drifts. "Ethan?" He looked wild. His coat was open, his hat pulled low, his beard frosted with ice. He reached her just as her legs gave out completely. He caught her. His arms went around her, hard and desperate, holding her up against his chest. He smelled of horse sweat and tobacco and the distinct, sharp scent of fear. "I caught you," he gasped, his breath coming in white clouds. "I caught you." "Let me go," she mumbled, her voice thick. I have to catch the train." "There is no train," he said, pulling her tighter. "There is no train for you." He dragged her away from the creek bank, toward the shelter of a large cottonwood tree. He turned her to face him, gripping her shoulders. His hands were shaking. "You are freezing," he said. "Why did you come?" she asked. "To give me my wages." Ethan winced. The shame on his face was naked. "No wages." "Then let me go." "I can't," he said. "I can't let you go." "Why?" she demanded, finding a spark of strength. "Because you feel guilty? Because Suma yelled at you? Because I was wrong!" Ethan shouted. The shout died in the air, swallowed by the snow. He lowered his voice, his eyes searching hers. "I was wrong. Clara, I was looking at the mud on you, not the woman standing in it. I judged you for surviving. God help me, I judged you for doing what you had to do to stay alive." Delilah, Clara, looked at him. She saw the regret in his eyes, deep and genuine. "I am not Delilah," she whispered. "Delilah was a lie." "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. "Delilah was the woman who mended my socks. Delilah was the woman who laughed at my bad jokes. Delilah was the woman who held me in the dark. That was real. The name was a lie. The woman was real. I am damaged. Ethan," she said, "you know what I am. You know what was done to me. I know." He said, "And I don't care." He took off his gloves and cupped her face. His hands were warm, shockingly so against her frozen skin. "I do not want a pristine wife," he said. "I do not want a porcelain doll to sit on my shelf. I want the woman who walked through hell and came out kind. I want a woman who is stronger than I am." He leaned his forehead against hers. "Come back," he whispered. "Not as a housekeeper, not as a secret. Come back as yourself. Come back as Clara. Be Clara Calloway." She searched his face, looking for the pity she despised. She found none. She found only a raw, terrifying vulnerability. He was risking everything, his heart, his reputation, his peace, for her. He kissed her then. It was not a kiss of passion, but of desperation and promise. It was a seal on a contract written in the snow. Clara felt the fight go out of her. The wall she had built against the world crumbled. She sagged against him, her knees finally buckling. "Ethan," she sobbed into his coat. "I'm so tired. I know," he said, scooping her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "I know. You can rest now. I've got you." The ride back was a blur of cold wind and the rhythmic gait of the horse. Ethan held her in front of him on the saddle, wrapped inside his own coat, his arms a cage of warmth around her. When they reached the ranch, Suma was waiting on the porch. She did not say a word. She simply opened the door and stepped aside. Ethan carried her into the main room. The fire was roaring, built up to a blaze that threatened to singe the rug. He set her down on the settee and began to strip the frozen outer layers from her body. He knelt before her, pulling off her boots, rubbing her numb feet with his rough hands to bring the blood back. Suma brought a blanket and a cup of broth, then disappeared, leaving them alone in the firelight. Clara sat shivering, the warmth slowly seeping back into her bones. She looked at the room. It looks different now. It didn't look like a hiding place. It looked like a home. Ethan sat on the floor near her feet, watching her. He looked exhausted. His eyes shadowed, but he did not look away. "Tell me," he said softly. "Tell you what? Tell me about her. Clara." Clara took a breath. It hurt her lungs, but it felt clean. She liked to read. Clara began, her voice raspy. Before everything, she liked poetry. She wanted to see the ocean. She had a cat named Barnaby. Ethan listened. He listened as she talked for an hour, pouring out the small details of the girl she had been before the world broke her. She told him about the smell of the rain in Ohio, about the aunt who didn't care, about the charm of the man who turned out to be a devil. She told him about the camps. Not everything. Some things were too dark to speak aloud, but enough. She told him about hunger, about the cold, about the moment she decided she would rather die in the woods than spend another night in that tent. When she finished, the fire was low. Ethan reached out and took her hand. He turned it over, tracing the calluses on her palm, the scars on her knuckles. "I am sorry," he said. "I am so sorry I added to the weight you carry. You were scared." She said, "I was a fool," he corrected. He looked up at her. "Marry me," he said. Clara looked at him. "Truly, truly," he said. "Let's go to the Reverend. Let's use your name. Let Mrs. Higgins faint in the pew. I don't care. I want everyone to know. They will talk. Ethan, they will say terrible things." "Let them talk," Ethan said, his jaw setting in that stubborn line she loved. "Let them try to say a word against my wife. I will build a fence around this ranch so high the gossip can't climb it, and if it does, we will burn it down together." Clara Dane looked at the man who had chased her into the snow. She saw the grief he still carried for his first wife, but she saw room there, too. Room for her. Room for a love that was not innocent, but weathered and tough as the sagebrush. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." Ethan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. He climbed onto the settee and pulled her into his arms. They held each other in the quiet house, two broken things fitting together to make something whole. "My name is Clara," she whispered against his neck. "Hello, Clara," he replied. "Welcome home." The next morning, the ranch was a different world. The air was still cold, but the sun seemed brighter. Suma was in the parlor. The bolt of white silk was spread across the large oak table. She was measuring it with a piece of string. her face focused and serious. Ethan walked in, holding a mug of coffee. He stopped, looking at the fabric. "Suma," he said. Suma looked up. She had a pin in her mouth. She took it out. "You brought her back," she said. "I did." "Good," Suma said. "I would have had to poison your stew if you hadn't." Ethan smiled, a genuine sheepish smile. "I believe you would have. I am making the dress," Suma announced. "You?" Ethan asked. I thought we would take it to the dressmaker in town." "No," Suma said firmly. "That woman has a mouth like a loose gate. She will not touch this silk. I will make it." "Can you sew silk?" Ethan asked. Suma smoothed the fabric with her dark, weathered hand. "I sewed my own wedding dress, Ethan Calloway, out of deerskin and beads. This is just cloth. It is easy." She looked at him, her eyes softening. "It will be a warrior's dress," she said. "For a woman who has fought a war?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "Make it beautiful." "Suma," Suma snorted, picking up her shears. "The woman is already beautiful," she said. "The dress is just wrapping. Now go. You have cows to feed, and a fiancé to court, properly this time." Ethan walked out of the house, into the crisp morning air. He took a deep breath. It smelled of ice and pine and promise. He walked toward the barn, his step light, ready to face the winter, ready to face the town, ready to face whatever came for them. He was not alone anymore, and neither was she. The air on the day before the wedding was brittle, held together by a tension that had nothing to do with the impending ceremony and everything to do with the man standing at the bar of the Golden Nugget Saloon. Ethan Calloway had come into Dead Lantern for the final formalities. The marriage license sat in his breast pocket, a piece of paper that cost $2 and promised a lifetime. He felt a strange mixture of lightness and gravity. He was marrying a woman with a past that could hang a man, but for the first time in 5 years, he was looking forward to the sunrise. Suma had accompanied him, ostensibly to inspect the supply of winter squash at the Mercantile, but in reality, she was his second pair of eyes. She moved through the town like a shadow, her shawl pulled tight, observing everything without appearing to look at anything. Ethan was stepping out of the sheriff's office, the license secured. When he saw him, the stranger was leaning against the hitching post outside the saloon. He was a tall man, lean as a whip snake, wearing a duster that had seen the dust of a dozen territories. He was cleaning his fingernails with a knife that looked sharp enough to shave with. Mrs. Higgins, the banker's wife, was talking to him. She was pointing a gloved finger toward the north, toward the Calloway Ranch. Ethan felt the blood freeze in his veins. He stepped back into the shadow of the boardwalk awning. The man was not looking at the land misses. Higgins was pointing to. He was nodding, a smile on his face that did not reach his eyes. He looked like a man who had just been told where the gold was buried. Suma appeared at Ethan's elbow. She did not startle him. She simply materialized. "You see him?" Suma asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I see him," Ethan said. "He calls himself Mr. Vance." Suma said, "He tells the grocer he is looking to buy grazing land. But he asks the stable boy if the Calloway Ranch has a cellar. He asks if the woman there has dark hair. He is the hunter," Ethan said. The realization settled on him like a heavy stone. "He is a wolf," Suma corrected, "and he has found the scent." Ethan's hand drifted to the Colt on his hip. "I should kill him here, save the trouble." Suma gripped his forearm. Her fingers were like iron bands. "No, you shoot a man in the street. You go to jail. Then she is alone. We go home, now." The ride back to the ranch was a race against a sun that seemed determined to expose them. They pushed the horses hard, the wagon bouncing violently over the frozen ruts. Ethan drove with a singular, terrifying focus. Every shadow on the ridge looked like a rifleman. When they pulled into the yard, Clara was on the porch. She was shaking a rug, the dust flying in the cold air. She looked up, smiling when she saw them. But the smile died instantly when she saw Ethan's face. She dropped the rug. She did not ask what was wrong. She knew. "Is he here?" she asked, her voice steady but thin. He is in town, Ethan said, jumping down from the wagon. He knows where you are. Mrs. Higgins pointed the way like a bird dog. Clara went pale, her hand going to her throat. Silas sent him. We don't have much time, Ethan said. If he is as good as they say, he will wait for dusk. He will want to come when we are sleeping. I have to leave, Clara said, turning toward the house. I will take a horse. I will go into the mountains. You will freeze in the mountains before midnight, Suma snapped, climbing down from the seat, and he will track you in the snow like a wounded deer. Then what? Clara cried, the panic finally cracking her voice. I cannot stay here. I will not let him burn this house down around you. You are going to the root cellar, Ethan said. Clara recoiled. The root cellar was an earthen dugout behind the kitchen, used for storing potatoes and carrots through the winter. It was dark, damp, and smelled of wet earth. It was a hole in the ground. No, she whispered. Please, Ethan, not the dark. I can't be trapped in the dark. It reminded her of the trunk. It reminded her of the closet Silas used to lock her in when she displeased him. It is the only place he will not look immediately, Ethan said, gripping her shoulders. I will be right above you. I promise. Suma opened the trapdoor on the pantry floor. The smell of cold earth drifted up. Go, girl, Suma said, her voice unusually gentle. Be a seed. Wait for the spring. Clara looked at the black square on the floor. She looked at Ethan. She saw the terror in his eyes, mirroring her own. He was not trying to control her. He was trying to keep her alive. She nodded. She took the candle Suma handed her and descended the ladder. The darkness swallowed her. Ethan closed the trap door and pulled the heavy jute rug over it, then dragged the kitchen table on top of the rug. Now, Ethan said to Suma, we wait. Dusk fell like a hammer. The wind picked up, howling around the eaves, masking the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Ethan had briefed the hands. Buck and Shorty. They were good men, loyal to the brand. But they were cowboys, not gunfighters. He told them to stay in the bunkhouse, to keep their lights off and their rifles ready, but to fire only if the house was breached. Ethan sat in the dark parlor, his rifle across his knees. Suma sat in the kitchen, a butcher knife on the table in front of her. They waited for 3 hours. Then, the dog barked, just once, a sharp, surprised yelp that was cut off abruptly. Ethan stood up, moving to the window. He saw nothing but the white expanse of the yard, illuminated by a sliver of moon. Mr. Calloway. The voice came from the front porch. It was calm, conversational, the voice of a neighbor stopping by for sugar. I know you are in there, the voice said. I saw the smoke from your chimney. Ethan moved to the door. He cracked it open, keeping his body behind the heavy oak frame. Get off my land, Ethan shouted. Now! That is not very hospitable, the man replied. I just want to talk. About a business transaction. I am not selling land, Ethan said. I am not buying land, the man said. I am selling a service. Ethan hesitated. He signaled Suma to stay back. He opened the door fully and stepped out onto the porch, his rifle leveled at the man standing at the bottom of the steps. Mr. Vance stood with his hands clearly visible, away from his guns. He was smiling. You have a guest. Mr. Vance said, a Mrs. Dane, although I believe she goes by Delilah now. Pretty thing, dark hair, nervous disposition. She is not here. Ethan lied. Mr. Vance tutted, shaking his head. Mr. Calloway, please. I tracked a Comanche raiding party across the Staked Plains in '62. Do not insult me. I saw the wagon tracks. I know she is here. Ethan cocked the hammer of his rifle. The sound was loud in the cold air. What do you want? Ethan asked. I want the girl, Vance said. She is not a girl. She is my fiancée. She is a runaway chattel, Vance corrected. And a thief. Ethan took a breath. The cold air burned his lungs. How much? Ethan asked. Vance raised an eyebrow. Excuse me, how much is the bounty? Ethan asked. 500? 1,000. Vance laughed softly. It was a dry, rasping sound. I will give you $2,000 in gold, Ethan said. Right now. You turn your horse around. You ride away. You tell Silas Dane you lost the trail in the snow. 2,000, Vance mused. That is a lot of money for a used wife. 3,000, Ethan said. It is everything I have in the safe. Vance took a step up the stairs. Ethan raised the rifle barrel to the man's chest. It is a generous offer, Vance said. Truly. And if this were about retrieving a wife, I might take it. Silas is a cheap bastard. He wouldn't pay half that. Then take it, Ethan said. I can't. Vance said. His eyes glinted in the moonlight. You see, Mr. Calloway, the job description has changed. Silas Dane has moved on. He has found a new wife, a rich widow in Denver. Very respectable. Ethan frowned, confusion warring with the adrenaline. Then why does he want Clara? Because he is still married to Clara, Vance said simply. Bigamy is a crime, and Silas is trying to become a city councilman. He cannot have a loose end walking around Wyoming, especially one who knows about his previous business ventures. Ethan felt a cold sickness settle in his stomach. He isn't looking for her to bring her back. Vance shook his head. No, sir. He is paying me to make sure she never comes back. He doesn't want a reunion. He wants a widow. Or, I suppose, he wants to be a widower. It is much tidier. So you are here to kill her, Ethan whispered. I am here to clean up a mess, Vance said. Now, $3,000 is nice, but Silas is paying $5,000 for proof of death. And unlike you, Silas is a repeat customer. Vance's hand moved. It was a blur of motion. Ethan fired. The shot went wide, chipping the wood of the porch railing, because Ethan had thrown himself sideways as Vance's bullet shattered the window pane where his head had been a second before. Ethan rolled and came up behind the water barrel. He worked the lever of his Winchester. Vance was gone. He had vanished into the shadows of the yard. Give her to me, Calloway! Vance's voice echoed from the darkness of the barn. You cannot protect her. I will burn this place to the ground if I have to. Ethan looked toward the barn. The horses were in there, the dry hay. If Vance lit the barn, the fire would spread to the house in this wind. Ethan looked back at the kitchen window. Suma was gone. Suma had slipped out the back door the moment the shooting started. She did not have a gun. She carried only her butcher knife and a length of white silk, a scrap from the wedding dress she had been sewing. She moved low to the ground, crawling through the snow behind the woodshed. She was 60 years old, and her joints ached in the cold. But her blood remembered the old ways. Her grandmother had taught her how to move so that even the owls did not hear. She made her way to the creek bed. 100 yards from the house. She broke a branch, deliberately loudly. Snap. She waited. She heard the crunch of snow. Vance was moving. He was flanking the house, trying to get a line of sight on the back door. Suma tied the strip of white silk to a bush. It fluttered in the wind, a beacon in the moonlight. It looked like a woman's scarf, caught in a branch as she ran. Then Suma ran. She did not run toward safety. She ran toward the canyon, the deep slash in the earth a mile from the ranch house known as Devil's Drop. She made sure her footprints were deep. She dragged her left foot slightly, mimicking the gait of a woman in heavy skirts stumbling in the snow. She reached the ridge and looked back. A dark shape was following her trail. Vance had taken the bait. He thought Clara was making a break for it. Ethan saw the shadow move away from the barn. He saw the figure heading toward the creek. He didn't understand at first. Why would Vance leave the house? Then he saw the tracks, small, dragging footprints leading away from the back door. Clara? Panic seized him. Had she climbed out? Had she run? He ran to the kitchen. The table was still over the trap door. He shoved it aside and ripped up the rug. Clara, he hissed. Ethan? Her voice came from the dark, trembling. Stay there. She was safe. So who was out there? Suma. Ethan cursed. He grabbed his rifle and ran out the back door. He saw the tracks leading toward the canyon. He knew immediately what the old woman was doing. She was drawing the wolf away from the lamb. Ethan ran. He ignored the burning in his lungs. He followed the tracks, his eyes scanning the ridge line. The canyon was a jagged wound in the prairie, a sheer drop of 200 feet into darkness. The wind screamed through it, loud enough to drown out a scream. Suma reached the edge. She stopped. She had nowhere left to run. This was the end of the line. She crouched behind a boulder, gripping her knife. She was not afraid to die. She had lived a long time, but she wanted to make sure the man died first. Vance came up the rise. He was breathing hard. He saw the figure crouching by the rock. "End of the run, darlin'," he called out, raising his pistol. "Silas sends his regards." He cocked the hammer. "Hey!" The shout came from behind him. Vance spun around. Ethan stood 20 yards away, his rifle raised. He was heaving for breath, sweat freezing on his forehead. "Drop it!" Ethan yelled. Vance smiled. He looked at Ethan, then back at the figure behind the rock. "You followed me," Vance said. "That was foolish. Rancher! Now I have to kill you both." He was fast, incredibly fast. He swung the pistol toward Ethan and fired. The bullet struck Ethan in the thigh. It felt like being hit with a sledgehammer. Ethan's leg buckled, and he went down into the snow. Vance laughed. He walked toward Ethan, leveling the gun for the kill shot. "Amateur." Vance spat. "You should have stayed in the house." From behind the rock, a shadow launched itself. Suma did not move like an old woman. She moved like a striking viper. She hit Vance's back, her small weight throwing him off balance. She drove the knife down, aiming for his neck. Vance roared and thrashed, throwing an elbow back. It is connected with Suma's temple. She flew backward, landing hard in the snow, the knife skittering away toward the edge of the canyon. Vance spun around, blood streaming from a shallow cut on his shoulder where the knife had grazed him. He raised the gun toward Suma. Stupid old... Crack. The shot rang out, sharp and final. Vance stiffened. He looked down at his chest. A flower of red was blooming on his duster, right over his heart. He looked up at Ethan. Ethan was lying on his stomach in the snow, the Winchester propped on a rock. His face was a mask of grim determination. He worked the lever, ejecting the spent shell. Vance's gun dropped from his hand. He swayed. He took a step back, his boot finding only air at the canyon's edge. He teetered for a second, his eyes wide with surprise, and then he fell backward. There was no scream, just the sound of the wind. Ethan dropped his head onto his arms, the adrenaline crashing out of him. "Ethan." Suma was crawling toward him. Blood was trickling from her hairline, but her eyes were clear. "I'm all right," Ethan gasped, clutching his leg. "I'm all right." Suma reached him. She tore her apron and tied it tightly around his thigh. It was a flesh wound, deep and messy, but it hadn't hit the artery. "He is gone?" Suma asked, looking at the edge. "He is gone," Ethan said. "No!" A hand slammed onto the rim of the canyon. Ethan and Suma froze. Vance hauled himself up. He was a monster. He had been shot in the chest, but he had caught a scrub oak root 5 feet down. He dragged himself over the lip of the cliff, coughing blood. He had lost his gun, but he pulled a knife from his boot. He crawled toward them. His eyes were glazed, dead, but his body refused to quit. "Confession," Ethan wheezed, struggling to lift his rifle. The lever was jammed with snow. He couldn't fire. Vance lunged. Ethan swung the rifle like a club, the stock connecting with Vance's jaw. Vance collapsed, face down in the snow. He wheezed, a bubbling, wet sound. Ethan rolled over, grabbing Vance by the collar of his duster. He dragged the dying man's face out of the snow. "Write it," Ethan growled. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out the marriage license and a pencil stub. "Write it!" Ethan yelled, shaking him. "Write that she is innocent. Write that Silas sent you." Vance looked at him with fading eyes. He tried to spit, but only blood came out. "Go to hell," Vance whispered. "You first," Ethan said. He pressed the barrel of the jammed rifle against Vance's forehead. It was a bluff, but Vance didn't know that. "Write it, and I won't kick you back over the edge. I will let you die on solid ground." Vance's hand shook as he took the pencil. He scrawled 3 lines on the back of the marriage license. It was barely legible, stained with pink droplets. But it was there. Silas Dane ordered a hit. Clara Dane innocent. The pencil fell from his fingers. Vance shuddered once, and then the light went out of his eyes forever. Ethan slumped back, clutching the paper. The pain in his leg was a roaring fire now. Suma sat beside him, her breathing ragged. "We are alive," she said, sounding surprised. "We are alive," Ethan agreed. A lantern bobbed in the distance. Horses were approaching. It was the sheriff. Sheriff Miller rode up with 2 deputies. He looked at the body of the bounty hunter, then at Ethan's bleeding leg, then at the old woman wiping blood from her face. Miller dismounted slowly. He walked over to Vance's body and kicked it lightly with his boot. "Vance," the sheriff grunted. "Known him for years. Mean son of a bitch." He looked at Ethan. "What happened? Calloway? He tried to kill us," Ethan said, holding up the blood-stained paper. "He was hired by my fiancée's ex-husband to murder her. The sheriff took the paper. He read it by the light of his lantern. He didn't look surprised. I figured," Miller said. Ethan stared at him. "You figured? I knew who she was." "Ethan," Miller said, spitting tobacco into the snow. "I got the flyers from Denver. Runaway wife. Thief. I saw her in town months ago. And you didn't do anything? She wasn't causing trouble." Miller shrugged. "And I don't much like returning women to men like Silas Dane. I figured she deserved a quiet life. But you let this man come here?" Ethan demanded, anger cutting through the pain. "You let him hunt her? I can't stop a man from asking questions, Ethan, and I can't arrest a man for looking at land. I was following him, got here a little late. It seems." "A little late," Ethan scoffed. Miller knelt down and looked at Ethan's leg. "I'll take care of the body," Miller said. "You get that leg stitched up. You have a wedding tomorrow." He stood up and tucked the confession into his pocket. "This paper will clear her name," Miller said. "For now, but you listen to me, Calloway. Silas Dane is a rich man. Rich men don't like losing. This paper stops the law, but it won't stop a bullet in the back." "What are you saying?" Ethan asked. "I'm saying the West is big, but it ain't that big," Miller said grimly. "You watch your back. The law can only do so much." Miller signaled his deputies to load Vance's body onto a horse. "Go home, Ethan," the sheriff said. The ride back to the ranch was slow and agonizing. Suma drove the sheriff's spare horse, with Ethan slumped in the saddle, drifting in and out of consciousness. When they reached the yard, the door to the house burst open. Clara ran out into the snow. She was wearing only her dress. No coat, no shawl. She didn't care. "Ethan!" She reached the horse as Suma helped him down. She saw the blood on his trousers, the pallor of his skin. She let out a cry, grabbing him, letting his weight fall onto her. "I'm fine," Ethan mumbled, leaning heavily on her. "I'm fine. They got him inside. They laid him on the rug in front of the fire." Clara's hands were shaking, but she moved with purpose. She cut away the pant leg. She called for hot water and whiskey. She cleaned the wound. She stitched the torn flesh with the same needle she had used to mend his socks. Her face was pale, set in a mask of fierce concentration. Ethan watched her. The pain was dulling into a throb. He reached out and touched her cheek. "He is dead," Ethan whispered. Clara's hand paused. "He signed a confession." Ethan said, "The sheriff has it. You are clear. Clara, you are free." Clara closed her eyes. A tear slipped out. She didn't sob. She just let out a breath that sounded like a weight falling from her soul. "And you?" she asked, looking at his leg. "I will have a limp at the wedding," Ethan said, trying to smile. "It adds character." Clara finished the stitch and tied it off. She leaned forward and rested her forehead against his chest, right over his heart. "You idiot," she whispered fiercely. "You wonderful, stupid idiot. You could have died." "I had to protect my investment," Ethan joked weakly. "I bought all that silk." Clara laughed, a wet, choked sound. She kissed his chest, then his neck, then his lips. It was a kiss of salt and blood and survival. Suma sat in the corner chair, holding a wet rag to her bruised temple. She watched them. "Is the dress finished?" Ethan asked, looking over Clara's shoulder at the old woman. Suma nodded. "It is finished." Good, Ethan said, his eyes closing as the exhaustion finally took him. Because I am not postponing. We are getting married tomorrow. If I have to crawl to the altar, we will carry you, Clara whispered, stroking his hair. We will carry you. The fire crackled, popping in the silence. Outside, the wind still howled, searching for the bounty hunter who would never return. But inside, the house held firm. They were battered. They were bleeding. But they were together, and for the first time in a long time, the ghosts were quiet. The ceremony took place on the banks of the Medicine Bow Creek, beneath the skeleton of an ancient cottonwood tree that had been split by lightning a decade prior, yet refused to die. It was a stark cathedral, open to the biting wind and the pale, indifferent sky of the Wyoming winter. There were no organ pipes, only the rushing sound of the water struggling against the encroaching ice. There were no pews filled with whispering townsfolk. The congregation consisted of 5 souls: Suma, wrapped in a blanket that looked as old as the hills, Buck and Shorty, the 2 ranch hands, holding their hats against their chests with freshly scrubbed hands, and Sheriff Miller, who stood a little apart, his badge dull in the gray light, a silent testament that the law was watching, but not interfering. Ethan Calloway stood leaning heavily on a cane Suma had carved from ash wood that morning. His leg was bandaged tight. The bullet wound a throbbing fire that traveled up his hip with every shift of his weight. But he stood upright. He refused the chair Shorty had brought down from the house. A man did not sit to meet his fate, and he did not sit to meet his bride. Then, Clara came from the house. She did not look like the Delilah Morse who had stepped off the freight wagon months ago, shrinking from the light. She did not wear the heavy collars or the scarves she had used to hide the evidence of her past. She wore the dress Suma had sewn. It was white silk, gleaming against the snow. But it was simple. There were no frills, no lace to distract the eye. The neckline was cut square and low enough to reveal the collarbone, and above it, the faint, jagged silver lines on her neck, the marks of a life that had tried to strangle her. She wore no veil. Her face was bare to the wind and the eyes of the men. Her dark hair was pulled back, exposing the line of her jaw, the set of her chin. She looked terrified, and she looked magnificent. She walked across the frozen ground, her boots hidden beneath the silk. When she reached Ethan, she stopped. She looked at his leg, then up to his eyes. She was waiting for him to flinch. She was waiting for him to look at the scars and see the history of the brothel, the violence of the camp, the shame of the property she had once been. Ethan did not look away. He did not look at the scars with pity, nor did he ignore them. He looked at them as one looks at a map, proof of the journey taken to get here. "You are cold," Ethan said, his voice rough. "I am not," Clara answered. Though her skin was pale as milk, "I am on fire." The Reverend, a nervous man Ethan had paid $20 to ride out from town, cleared his throat. He rushed through the liturgy, his teeth chattering, eager to be back by a stove. But when it came time for the vows, Ethan silenced him with a raised hand. He turned to Clara. He took her hand. His grip was strong, calloused, the grip of a man who held on to things he intended to keep. "I cannot promise you an easy life." "Clara," Ethan said, "the wind is hard here. The cattle die. The world is cruel. But I promise you this, no one will ever own you again. You belong to yourself, and I will stand between you and the dark until the day I die." Clara's breath hitched. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and fast, spilling over to freeze on her cheeks. "I promise to stay," she whispered, her voice carrying over the sound of the water. "I promise to stop running. I promise that my past is a story, but you are my life." The Reverend pronounced them man and wife. Sheriff Miller nodded once, a grim benediction, and mounted his horse. Buck and Shorty cheered, a ragged, joyous sound in the empty valley. Ethan dropped his cane. He ignored the agony in his leg and pulled Clara against him. He kissed her, not with the polite restraint of a church gathering, but with a fierce, consuming hunger that told the wind, the sheriff, and the ghosts of the past that this woman was home. The night fell early, bringing a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. The guests were gone. The hands were in the bunkhouse, drinking a bottle of whiskey Ethan had sent down. In the main bedroom, the fire was the only light. It cast long, dancing shadows against the timber walls. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, the big bed that had been Ethan's, the bed that had been lonely for 5 years. She was still in her white dress. She was trembling, not from cold now, but from a sudden, overwhelming shyness. The adrenaline of the danger was gone, leaving only the reality of the intimacy. Ethan sat in the armchair, his bad leg propped on a stool. He was watching her. "Does it hurt?" she asked, looking at his leg. "Like hell," he admitted. He stood up, wincing, and limped toward her. He stood before her, blocking the firelight. He reached out and touched the scars on her neck, his thumb tracing the lines gently. Clara flinched instinctively, her shoulders rising. Ethan stopped. He waited. He left his hand there until her shoulders dropped, until her breathing slowed. "I see you, Clara," he whispered. "I see all of it, and I have never seen anything more beautiful." He leaned down and kissed the scars, one by one. It was an act of worship, an act of erasure, with every touch of his lips. He was overwriting the memory of Silas Dane's hands. Clara let out a sob, a sound that seemed to tear itself from her chest. She wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him down. They fell onto the bed together. The lovemaking was not the frantic, fearful collision they had shared during the blizzard. It was slow. It was deliberate. It was tender, but there was a roughness to it too. A desperate need to be close, to merge, to confirm that they were both alive and warm and real. Ethan moved with a care that belied his size, mindful of her past, asking without words for permission for every touch. And Clara met him, not with submission, but with a fierce claim of her own. She touched his face, his chest, the gray in his beard. She learned the map of him. When it was over, they lay tangled in the sheets, the fire dying down to embers. Clara's head rested on his chest. She was crying, silent tears that soaked into his shirt. Ethan stroked her hair, his large hand rhythmic and soothing. "Why are you crying?" he murmured. "Because I am waiting to wake up," she whispered. "I am waiting to be back in the tent." "You are not in the tent," Ethan said. His voice was a rumble in his chest, solid as the earth. "You are in the ranch house of the Callaway spread. You are in Dead Lantern, Wyoming." He shifted, tilting her chin up so she had to look at him. "You are my wife." "Clara." The word hung in the air. Wife. It had been a word of ownership for her before, a word that meant slave, but coming from his mouth, in the quiet of this room, it sounded different. It sounded like a shield. "Wife," she repeated, testing the weight of it. "Wife," he confirmed. "Go to sleep, Mrs. Callaway. I've got the watch." Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time in 4 years, she slept without dreaming of running. The winter broke in March, giving way to a spring that was wet and muddy. The snowmelt flooded the creek, and the world turned a brown, slushy gray. The honeymoon, if it could be called that, was short. Reality returned with the thaw. Rumors in Dead Lantern did not die easily. The story of the bounty hunter had spread, twisted by the tongues of the bored and the malicious. Some said Ethan had hired a killer to get rid of a rival. Others said Clara was a witch who had lured men to their deaths in the canyon. When they went to town for supplies, the silence was deafening. Women crossed the street to avoid walking near Clara. Men touched their hats to Ethan, but looked through Clara as if she were made of glass. In the mercantile, Mrs. Higgins held court. She sniffed audibly when Clara entered. "I would check the inventory closely." "Mr. Henderson." "Mrs." Higgins said loudly to the shopkeeper. Once a thief, always a thief. Clara froze, her hand hovering over a bolt of calico. Ethan, standing by the door, stiffened. He took a step forward, his face darkening. But Clara caught his eye. She shook her head. "No." She picked up the fabric. She walked to the counter, right past Mrs. Higgins, moving with a dignity that was almost regal. 3 yards, please, Clara said to the grocer. And put it on the Calloway account. My husband is good at it. She did not look at Mrs. Higgins. She denied the woman the satisfaction of a reaction, but the stress took its toll. Ethan worked harder, driving himself and his men to exhaustion, trying to prove that his marriage had not weakened him. Then the crop failed. It was the hay. A late, black frost in May killed the alfalfa sprouts just as they were breaking ground. It meant they would have to buy winter feed, a massive expense that drained their savings. Ethan sat at the kitchen table late one night, the ledger open before him. He looked old. The worry lines were etched deep around his eyes. "We will be tight this winter," he said, rubbing his temples. "I might have to sell off 50 heads. Clara put a cup of coffee in front of him. She sat down. "I can help," she said. "You already work from dawn to dusk." "Clara, I mean with money," she said. "I can take in washing or sewing. Suma says my stitching is better than the dressmaker in town." "No," Ethan said sharply. "My wife will not scrub other people's laundry. It is honest work. Ethan, it is not about the work. It is about what they will say, that I cannot support you." "Let them say it," Clara snapped. She reached across the table and grabbed his hand, stopping his restless tapping. "Ethan, stop fighting the ghosts. We are partners. If the hay dies, we find another way." She started teaching the next week. It wasn't a formal school. It started with Shorty, who admitted sheepishly that he couldn't read the labels on the medicine bottles for the horses. Clara sat with him in the barn, using an old Bible and a piece of slate. Then Buck joined in. Then a hand from the neighboring ranch. A boy of 14 who had run away from home. They sat on hay bales, big, rough men listening to Clara's soft, steady voice as she taught them the difference between an A and AB. She was patient, she was kind, and slowly, the respect for her in the bunkhouse grew into a fierce, protective loyalty. One evening in July, a shadow moved in the hayloft. Clara was gathering eggs. She saw the movement. She didn't run. She climbed the ladder, huddled in the corner, behind a stack of grain sacks. Was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 12. She was filthy, her dress torn, her eyes wide with the feral terror of a trapped animal. Clara froze. It was like looking in a mirror. "Get away," the girl hissed, brandishing a rusty pitchfork. Clara raised her hands. "I am not going to hurt you. I'm hungry," the girl yelled, though she looked ready to cry. Clara sat down on the straw. She didn't move closer. "I know," Clara said. "I know what it feels like when your stomach thinks it is eating itself." The girl lowered the fork slightly. "Who are you? My name is Clara. This is my barn. I ain't going back," the girl cried. "My pa, he beats me when the whiskey takes him. I won't go back." "You don't have to," Clara said. She reached into her apron and pulled out a hard-boiled egg. She rolled it across the floorboards. "Eat." The girl ate it in 2 bites, shell and all. Clara brought her to the house. Ethan was washing up at the pump. He saw Clara leading the dirty, wild-eyed child. "Another mouth?" Ethan asked, wiping his face with a towel. "She is a runaway," Clara said. "Her name is Daisy. She stays." Ethan looked at the girl. He saw the bruises on her arms. He looked at his wife. He saw the set of her jaw, the same look she had worn when she faced him in the snow. He sighed, but there was a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Well," Ethan said, "if she stays, she works. Suma needs help snapping beans." Daisy stayed, and in saving the girl, Clara began to heal the parts of herself that she thought were dead forever. The turning point came in late August. It was the annual harvest festival at the church, a potluck dinner on the lawn. Ethan insisted they go. "We cannot hide forever," he said. They arrived with a basket of fried chicken Suma had made. The crowd was large. Tables were groaning with food. Children ran screaming through the grass. When Clara walked toward the serving table to place her basket, the chatter stopped. It rippled into silence. Mrs. Higgins was there, serving potato salad. She looked at Clara, then at the basket. "I don't think we have room for that." Mrs. Higgins said loudly. We have to be careful about hygiene. Who knows where that basket has been? It was a direct insult, implying Clara was unclean. The other women tittered nervously. Clara stood there, her face burning. She gripped the handle of the basket until her knuckles turned white. Ethan stepped up beside her. He took the basket from her hand. He set it down on the table with a force that made the silverware jump. He turned to Mrs. Higgins. He did not shout. His voice was low, calm, and carried across the entire lawn. Mrs. Higgins, Ethan said, you have spent the last 6 months trying to shame my wife. You have whispered, you have pointed, and you have judged. I'm only concerned for the community. Mrs. Higgins sniffed. You are concerned with your own self-righteousness, Ethan said. He looked around the crowd. He saw the sheriff. He saw Buck and Shorty. He saw the shopkeeper. You look at her and you see a past, Ethan said, addressing them all. You see rumors. I look at her and I see a woman who taught me how to read. I see a woman who took in a starving girl when the rest of you locked your doors. I see a woman who saved my life and my sanity. He put his arm around Clara's waist, pulling her close. She was trembling, but she stood tall. The good book says, judge not, lest ye be judged, Ethan said. But you all seem to have forgotten that chapter. Well, hear this. I know who she is. I know every scar. And I know every story. And she has more honor in her little finger than this whole town has in its bank accounts. He looked at Mrs. Higgins. If a man is judged by who he loves, Ethan said, his voice ringing with pride, then I hope to be judged by her, because loving her is the best thing I have ever done. Silence stretched across the lawn. It was heavy, awkward. Then, a slow clapping started. It was Sheriff Miller. He was leaning against a tree, clapping his hands slowly. Then Buck joined in. Then Shorty. Then the grocer's wife, who had always secretly liked Clara, stepped forward. I'll take a piece of that chicken. Mrs. Calloway, the grocer's wife said. It smells delicious. The dam broke. The town, tired of the hate, tired of the winter, and moved by the rancher's defense, stepped forward. Mrs. Higgins turned red and busied herself with the punch bowl. Defeated. Clara looked up at Ethan. He was looking down at her, his eyes shining with that same fierce protection she had seen by the creek. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan kissed her forehead. Right there in front of God and everyone. Eat some chicken. Clara, we have a long ride home. The sun was setting over the Calloway Ranch, painting the sky in streaks of violet and burnt orange. The air was cooling, promising another winter, but the fear of the cold was gone. Suma sat on the porch in a rocking chair, a blanket over her knees. She was smoking a small corncob pipe, watching the yard. Ethan and Clara were walking down by the paddock. They were walking hand in hand, their silhouettes merging into one long shadow against the grass. Daisy, the little runaway, was running ahead of them, throwing a stick for the ranch dog. Clara laughed. The sound drifted up to the porch. It was a full, throaty laugh, not the polite, terrified sound of Delilah Morse. It was the laugh of Clara Calloway. Suma puffed on her pipe, the smoke curling up into the twilight. She had seen many things in her life. She had seen war and famine, and the white men coming like locusts. She had seen death take the people she loved. She had learned to guard her heart, to expect the worst. But watching the two of them, the broken rancher and the soiled dove, building a life out of the wreckage, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the tobacco. They said she was a liar. Suma whispered to the empty air. They said she was lost. She watched Ethan stop and pull Clara into a kiss, the last light of the day catching the white of her simple dress. But not all lost girls stay lost, Suma murmured, closing her eyes and listening to the wind in the cottonwoods. Some just need someone to believe they are not liars. Some just need to be found. Thank you for listening to the story of Ethan and Clara. It has been a journey through the snow, the heartbreak, and the healing of the American West. I hope their story reminds you that no matter how heavy the past is, the future is something we build with our own hands and with the people who believe in us. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you in the snowy mountains, a busy city, or somewhere quiet? Please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on the story. Did you think Ethan would forgive her? Would you have done what Suma did? If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to From Wild West. We have many more stories of the frontier to tell, stories of outlaws, dreamers, and the love that survives the wild wind. Until the next time, keep your fire burning.